Hello, this video is an explanation, a bit of an elaboration on the final assignment for the first half of Sociology 191 for both of the sections for the summer semester 2021, COVID and sociological theory assignment. The due date for the final date for the due date of the assignment is July 4th. It's worth 20% of the final grade, and I'm looking for approximately 700 words. The word count is a guideline, and it's absolutely possible to do very, very well and write slightly less. And it's also possible to not do particularly well and write a lot more in a way that I hope is obvious. It's of course going to depend on which words you choose and what order you put them in as to whether or not you satisfactorily produce an assignment that corresponds to what's required here. But it's a reasonable request to have an idea of approximately how much writing is expected from you. And so if you have more to say, feel free to write more. But if you find yourself unable to, if you only have 300 words, it's very unlikely that you will have been able to accomplish everything that's required in this assignment. So 700 words approximately. Now the readings for the assignment are, in addition to having read the assigned chapters, is the Stats Canada report, Gendered Impacts of the COVID-19 Pandemic on the Proportion of Youth Neither in Employment nor Education at the Start of the School Year, and also Chapter 8, Contemporary Sociological Theory. I have put on the in the assignment tab links to these files, and so I'm going to just quickly switch over to the screen to show you what this looks like. And so here there are links to the assignment document and to the two readings. And so A1 reading, Contemporary Sociological Theory, is and the Gendered Impacts. Those are the two readings that this assignment is specifically about. And so now let me get back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so now what is it you need to understand in order to be able to do this assignment? Now the main thing that I want you to understand is that I want you to understand and then demonstrate to me through what you've written from this assignment is, what is NEET, N-E-E-T, and does it matter to Canadian society? NEET is neither in employment, education, or training. It's a category that was established by British policymakers in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and it has since become a category fairly widely used in sociology and in economics to try to understand an aspect of labor market phenomena. Why is it relative to earlier periods in the history of advanced capitalist economies that young people aren't entering into the labor market in the same way, at the same rate as was the case in the past? In the Stats Canada article, very early on page 1, they give a broad indication of what it is that motivated the authors of the StatsCan report to look at this particular feature. And they write, previous research has shown that youth not in employment, education, or training, and that's where the acronym NEET comes from, are considered at risk of long-term economic and social difficulties. This risk grows if the situation persists as NEET youth become more discouraged, disengaged, and socially excluded. And there's a certain, I think, plausibility to the idea that the longer you are out of these areas, the longer that one's life is not partly organized and structured by either employment or education or training, it's plausible enough to suggest that the more difficult it will be to return to one of those areas, employment or education or training. And the ultimate goal of which is for people to be able to find an employed position. Now, obviously, this is a generalization across entire societies and entire communities. Individuals can lead perfectly fine lives under particular exceptional circumstances, but typically sociologists and policymakers are trying to understand the overall behavior and the overall phenomena that regulate and that characterize entire societies. And in a society like Canada, survival for everyone, all individuals in the medium and long term our survival depends on having the very, very large majority of the population employed, producing and reproducing all of the necessary services and goods we all depend on to live through every day. And so the problem that's being addressed is there a section, in this case youth, of the population that is facing specific particular problems entering into and remaining in employment? And how does that matter to society? So it's clear enough why that should matter to the youth in particular who become discouraged, disengaged, and socially excluded. But the sociological question, the broader sociological question is, does it matter to anyone else? Does it matter to the rest of, in our case, Canadian society? At the very beginning of the, and now I want to call to your attention just briefly from the quote, how it is that the information in this article is organized. And so there are 2 footnotes in that brief quote, and those footnotes refer to further study or earlier studies performed by Stats Canada and also by OECD, the Office for Economic Cooperation and Development, around the category of NEET and EET and its alleged and its impact on different societies. And so these are the references to that earlier work. Now, so once you've understood, once you've begun to see what it is they're talking about when they're talking about NEET, what I need you to do is think about, how does it matter? And to whom does it matter? How does it matter whether or not over the course of the COVID pandemic, NEET has increased or decreased? And to whom does it matter? Now, part of the reason I want you to focus on to whom does it matter has to do with the differences between the 2 main sociological theories that we were looking at. Structural functionalism analyzes social phenomena from the point of view of society overall, whereas conflict theory analyzes social phenomena from the point of view of the different groups that make up society. Conflict theory, neo-Marxism starts from struggle, from conflict, whereas structural functionalism starts from equilibrium. Both of these approaches have their proponents. Both of these approaches manage to explain different aspects of many, many, many different social phenomena. If they didn't make any sense, sociologists wouldn't pursue them. And so these questions I'm asking you to consider these general questions because they will help you to make the connections I'm looking for between the sociological theories and the subject matter. So here I've briefly summarized structural functionalism and conflict theory. And so you can take a look at that when the time comes. Now for part A is organized around two questions from the reading in contemporary sociological theory. How do social structures and the values underlying them contribute to social stability? Conversely, how does the structure of inequality between privileged groups seeking to maintain their advantages and subordinate groups seeking to increase theirs lead to conflict and often to social change? And so the main framework for this structure of inequality in conflict theory, neo-Marxism, is the class struggle, the difference between wealthy people and everybody else. But subsequent to the early development of this theory, a number of other structural inequalities have increasingly gained the attention of sociologists and policymakers, and the differences between the interests of youth compared to the interests of the rest of society is one dynamic of inequality that is important, that is possibly important to consider. Inequalities between genders is another dynamic of inequality that has increasingly drawn the attention of sociologists. And in this study, differences between the responses, the labor market response and the general population response to COVID by gender is analyzed. And in another dynamic that's examined in the StatsCan report are the differences between Canadian-born citizens and immigrants, Canadians who were born or whose parents were born somewhere else. And the research shows that there is a difference between those two groups with respect to their ability, with respect to their response to COVID and the response to them under COVID in the labor market. And so the question to ask is, how does the structure of inequality between these privileged groups help them maintain their advantage, and how do subordinate groups seeking to increase theirs lead to conflict? So for part A, one last thing. For part A, the question requires of you to be able to spell out what it is that structural functionalism, how structural functionalism in a general way approaches these questions, how conflict theory / neo-Marxism approaches those questions, and to compare those two. For part B, I will then want you to apply to, or to use those two theories and apply them to what it is we see when we take a look at the data produced with regards to a particular category in Canadian society, that is youth who are neither in employment, education, or training. How does the NEAT category help us understand stability? That is to say, can changes in the extent to which youth are neither in education, employment, or training be adjusted and transformed and changed in order to preserve stability in Canadian society? And also a different question, does focus on that particular group, and does the focus on that particular group in the way it's carried out in this study help us understand inequality, and also how that inequality is maintained through the very structures that have produced this particular category? So on page 1, the authors collected all the data that collected the box is called highlights. The highlights of the results and the conclusions that their research produced is captured, is collected at the very beginning. And so what you need to do for part B of this assignment is pick one of those highlights, track it through the argument as it's presented in the Stats Canada article, and then demonstrate the connection between not just the conclusion, but the arguments that are mobilized in the Stats Can report. Connect all of that to the two theories as you've described them from the other reading, the Chapter 8 Contemporary Sociological Theory reading. So just to pick one example, we see one of the data points reads, increased post-secondary school attendance appears to be a leading explanation for young women's quicker rebound in September, October of 2020. And then the rest of the section, the rest of that paragraph, suggests some reasons that this might have been the case. So if you pick that topic, what you need to do is you need to connect those reasons that might explain why it is that young women, more than young men, were quicker to rebound. They were quicker to increase their post-secondary school attendance. Now, so people who are in post-secondary are not in the NEAT category. The concern is that if you're in the NEAT category, you're less likely to eventually find employment. And that's the concern for overall society. The initial finding is that youth who are neither in employment, education, or training tend to remain outside of employment for the rest of their lives. And that is a problem. And the concern is that is a problem for society. It's obvious that it's a problem for the people who end up not finding employment for their whole lives. It's a little bit less obvious how that's also a problem for the rest of us. So what you need to do is you need to pick one of these topics, one of these highlights. You need to track that highlight through the article. You need to demonstrate to me that you understand what results and what arguments are made by the authors of the article to land on that particular point. And then having done that, connect it to structural functionalism and stability, and also connect it to conflict theory and inequality. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much.